After spending a couple of weeks ranting about the Revelry to my clanmates, I'd like to talk a little bit about this event and its effect on the health of PvP, now that I've calmed down a bit and I'm able to keep a coherent discourse going. The Revelry introduced changes that broke PvP and caused some outcry from portions of the community and props from others. Bungie has actually acknowledged they went too far with these changes through community manager Cosmo, who had the following to say about it. With the Revelry, we wanted to rejuvenate every activity type in Destiny with a global change to the sandbox that lasted for a limited time. We knew this would be disruptive, but were willing to try the experiment because the event only lasts for a few weeks. It's clear we overshot. Instead of adding excitement and variation to the Crucible, especially in competitive, we've instead made the experience random and frustrating. We don't have the ability to immediately remove tonics in competitive via our servers. We'll continue to investigate possible changes, but this experiment will have to run the duration of the Revelry before we can patch a change. We've learned a lot from the last 2 days of Revelry. The next time we make changes that affect the overall sandbox for a limited time, we will ensure a much better experience for the Crucible. Although I've been pretty salty about this subject with my mates, I haven't in the Bungie forums, so I'm not about to start bashing Bungie because nothing will be gained from that. And, well, I'm all out of salt at this point. I'm here to put forward some constructive criticism for Bungie and the community by discussing how unwelcoming this event was, why the changes it introduced shouldn't have been applied to competitive, how Bungie could have avoided backlash through better design and incentives, how Bungie can still make it up to us, and I'd also like to break down some criticisms leveled towards those that, well, much like me, don't care about the Revelry. I mean, I don't care about the Revelry, but actually wanted to. For those not in the know, the Revelry will end on May 7th, and until then we'll be able to manipulate how quickly we get one of our abilities back by activating a tonic, which is a consumable given to us by Eva Levante at the tower that we activate by consuming 50 Reveler's essences. The tonic allows us to boost the charge rate of either our grenade, melee or class ability for an hour and inside of any PvE and PvP activity in the game. Besides this, and if you have access to pieces of the 2 armor sets exclusive to this event, you'll get a further increase in the charge rate of the ability you choose to buff with the tonic for each piece of these armor sets that you equip. Lastly, headshot kills will have a greater chance to drop orbs of light. Now, since the start of the event, this has been disabled from comp, so it only affects quick play. If you've been playing Crucible since Forsaken came out, I think you'll be able to see exactly where the issues start rising. Ability spam, and more supers in each match than ever before, among a few other potential problems. But what exactly is the big deal here? Well, there are 2 main issues for me: how long the event lasts, and the number of Crucible playlists it affects. Although this event ends on May 7th, it started on April 16th, so it's a 3-week-long event. And within it, all Crucible playlists were affected by this change. This means that for 3 weeks, and if you enjoy playing normal Crucible, there is no room for you in Destiny 2. Unlike previous events that affected the way PvP played for a certain amount of time, like Iron Banner and Crimson Doubles, Bungie always made sure to have these as a rotator game modes in Crucible, leaving Quick Play, Rumble, and Comp open for everyone who didn't care about Iron Banner or Crimson Doubles. And these events never lasted more than a week. So almost everyone's taste in the Destiny PvP realm was being served. You could keep playing PvP as you'd normally do, or go check out a different special mode for a limited time, which is a very cool way to approach this type of event. With the Revelry, that concept was thrown out of the window. Bungie is not only forcing everyone to have to deal with these changes in every PvP game mode, but also forcing them throughout a lot longer stretch of time. So if you don't like it, there's only one thing you can do: stop playing PvP altogether. Well, you can always go back to Destiny 1 and, play Crucible there while this event doesn't end, so there's still a way out, but yeah, not within Destiny 2. This event is disrupting Crucible in a big way, disrupting Guardian's PvP plans for 3 weeks and shutting down a lot of them, breaking every aspect of it and making it an unwelcoming place for those of us who like to play Crucible in its normal form. And this is not even happening for the sake of making it a better experience, but only for the sake of making it a different one. If the Revelry lasted 1 week, I can see this not being that much of a problem for a lot of the Guardians who are complaining right now. Heck, I can even see it not being that much of a problem if it still lasted for 3 weeks but only affected quick play, for example. The main issue resides with everything being affected by this, and especially the competitive playlist. Most of the complaints I've been reading about when discussing how this event negatively affects PvP are geared towards the competitive playlist. The way comp is set up right now, losing a match is a huge deal. If you lose a match, you lose double the amount of points you'd lose in the previous seasons, so the stakes are a lot higher. By totally breaking Crucible with the tonic, Bungie created a whole new collection of issues players have been dealing with and had to adapt to in comp. And depending on your class of choice, you might not even be able to deal with it, no matter how much you try and no matter how everyone has access to the same speed of charge rates with the tonics and armor sets. Classes work differently, have different melees, grenade types, and class abilities. And buffing the speeds at which some of these regen will make even more apparent how much more dominant some can be over the others, creating an unsustainable and unbalanced mess. How do you fight back a Titan with infinite suppressor grenades, for example? No matter how everyone has access to the same speedy ability cooldowns, you won't be able to take much advantage of them if you're always being suppressed now, are you? There's a reason why this type of change is set to break the game, and unless the game is a bad one, it's not usually something that makes the game better. And PvP in Destiny 2, regardless of some of the issues it has, is still an awesome experience. So the risks are even greater than ever before because the variables are even harder to control, and the reward is the same. If the reward was bigger, given how risky it will be to go into comp during the Revelry's duration, an argument could be made in favor of these changes. However, with nothing to be gained from these changes in terms of incentives to accept them, it's a very, very hard sell. Those of us who play competitive and take their glory points seriously are left with two options: risk losing points with a broken game mode, or wait it out, not risk losing valuable points and keep going with the grind after this event is over. For a lot of us, the decision will be an easy but very frustrating one. Wait for the event to end even though we really want to go into comp. The risk is just too great. This means that because of this change, Bungie is effectively cutting 3 weeks out of a lot of players' grind and making it so reaching higher ranks and getting pinnacle guns becomes a lot harder due to even shorter times to grind for them properly. Competitive is very unforgiving and very unwelcoming as is. You have to deal with quitters and laggers, stacked teams, the best players and teams in the game, and a very unforgiving point system. The Revelry just added another layer of uncertainty to deal with, and at the end of the day, I don't think many of us will, and we'll just wait for the event to end. There are two main things Bungie didn't address when they designed the Revelry that would have made this buff to the abilities a non-issue in PvP, or at least not as impactful as it has been, giving us more options and adding incentives to the mix. Much like Bungie does with Iron Banner and Crimson Doubles, the Rotator playlist should have been the only place where buffs to ability recharge rates could be applied in, leaving comp, quick play and rumble intact. The players interested in having a more ability-based experience could go to the Rotator, while everyone else could play normal Crucible, enabling almost everyone to have the experience they want to have in the game. To make this even more interesting, the Rotator could also have 2 game modes that rotated each week. One week, we could have 2 6-on-6 game modes. On the second week, Iron Banner, and on the third week, 2 4-on-4 game modes. Yes, I'm including Iron Banner here because we have 12 weeks of Iron Banner per year, so I don't think it would hurt if we had one that was a little bit different from the usual. As far as incentives go, and regardless if we had ability buffs affecting all PvP modes like we have right now, or only one like I suggested before, this event lacks any type of incentive for players to embrace the change and go all in PvP. Good incentives would go a long way in making everyone more hip to a Crucible governed by ability spam for 3 weeks. And no, Arbalest doesn't count because it can be obtained outside of PvP, and I wouldn't want to make it a PvP exclusive during the event. They could have brought back a couple year 1 guns that everyone loved in PvP, but with random rolls and grindable through a Nade style bounty system that required us to complete them by using specific guns within the playlists. Alongside those, they could have added bounties for mods, cores, and mod components that rewarded the use of abilities, for example. For comp, loss penalties could have been brought down significantly during the event. This would negate the increase in risk because of the game mode's broken state and make it way more appealing for everyone to go into comp and just give it a real go. This would have also served as a good incentive to make a lot of players more hip to this change and not have to relinquish the playlist for 3 weeks. I imagine that a lot of effort and planning goes into making an event like this happen, and that everyone behind it wants it to succeed, not only for its monetary prospects but also for the player base enjoyment. It doesn't make sense to me that something with this kind of negative impact was done with the purpose of leaving a bad taste in players' mouths. With that being said, one of the sentences Cosmo wrote kinda baffles me. We knew this would be disruptive. but were willing to try the experiment because the event only lasts for a few weeks. If Bungie still wanted to keep the tonics affecting all playlists like they did, I think it would have been important for them to have considered the worst case scenario during the planning and testing phases, that this change would disrupt PvP in a big way, and that, much like I pointed out, this change would probably get a lot of people out of PvP and make it a very frustrating experience. This mindset would have enabled them to cover their bases and find ways to incentivize us to go to Crucible, regardless of its state, because of really cool or interesting incentives, something they did not do here. There's nothing wrong with trying something new and disruptive, but when you do it without keeping in mind how this new thing will affect Crucible and how you can make sure people will get into it even if they don't like it that much, you're just doing it for the sake of the change and not the people who will have to deal with it. And that, to me, is bad design. It seems like they just made the change and hoped for the best. And 3 weeks is almost 1/3 of a season. It's far too long to apply any disruptive change to a PvP mode, regardless of how much fun you think it will be. So when, like Cosmos said, it doesn't only last for a few weeks, it lasts for far too long. And it baffles me how they think almost 1/3 of a season is a sensible amount of time to have this going on. Now, going back to Cosmos' post, there's one last thing I'd like to comment on. We don't have the ability to immediately remove tonics in competitive via our servers. We'll continue to investigate possible changes, but this experiment will have to run the duration of the Revelry before we can patch a change. Even though they can't remove the tonics from competitive during the event, it doesn't mean they can't do anything to make it up to us after the event. The main issues with this change to comp are players losing 3 weeks of comp because they don't want to risk losing a ton of points, and losing a ton of points because players went in pressured by the idea of not having enough time to get to Legend or Fabled after the event is over. So to combat this and motivate players to just go in and play regardless of comp state, Bungie could reward back 50% of the glory points lost during the Revelry after the event is over. The percentage could be inferior to 50. This is just a starting point here to get a conversation going. This would effectively make it so point losses during the event would be reduced by 50%, creating an excellent incentive to play comp, which, for the huge broken change Bungie made with the tonics, is sorely lacking from comp right now, and would negate the level of disruption this change created for comp players. So, since Bungie can't make any changes during the event, and have acknowledged they went too far with it, I think it's only fair that the people who are being most punished by either losing a ton of points or not playing at all have something to make it up to them so they get points back or feel motivated to play and not have to wait out 3 weeks respectively. Arguing that PvP in the Revelry is fine because it's fun and different doesn't invalidate the lack of interest in it. Being different doesn't say a thing about the quality of the change being made. Destiny 1's Crucible is different from D2's right now, but is it better? Eating a steak is different from eating a pizza, but is it better? There isn't a right or wrong answer to these questions because it all depends on the person who's experiencing the different thing. It's 100% subjective. The same can be said about what represents fun to someone. Saying something is fun only validates your fun, and that's pretty much it. Just because someone likes basketball and I don't, doesn't mean that the things I love doing are immediately less fun. They are just different. Fun is totally subjective, so using it as an argument in defense of something adds nothing to a discussion. This type of arguments is what I've been reading the most when it comes to defending the Revelry. The problem is that they are completely void of content, add nothing to the discussion, don't focus on the main issues brought forth by the Revelry, and only serve to showcase the lack of empathy many players in the community have for real grievances from other Guardians, and that's a real shame. Another thing I see being tossed around a bunch is to just adapt to the changes and stop complaining. I think for the most part, players who say this forget about one thing when they say to just adapt. There are people in the game that can't stand playing when the only thing that's being used are abilities or supers in whatever Crucible game mode. It's not only about how comp now is a totally broken mess that's not worth going in for a lot of players, it's also about how unenjoyable it is for a lot of people that want to shoot guns and use abilities and not just abilities. If it's not enjoyable, why play? And that's another one of the issues in place here. People won't adapt. They'll just leave and have their plans screwed up because someone thought this was a good idea. Lastly, Let's look at the final argument I see being tossed around to negate the qualms many have with this change. Players were warned about these changes ahead of time, so if they didn't take measures to make sure this wouldn't affect them as hard, they shouldn't complain about it. Bungie announced the changes on April 10 on their blog, 6 days before the event started. 6 days. That's enough of a heads up for changes that have such a deep impact and last for 3 weeks? Really? Yes, they did warn us, but they did so too late in the game, making it so this change and the effects it has and will have on everyone's comp experience this season is their responsibility, not the players. If they had warned us about this at the start of the season, I think responsibility would be more on the player side of things, who should have planned ahead. But as it stands, their late communication and bad design decisions are being a total nuisance for a lot of folks. And that's why I think it's a good idea to think of something, and it doesn't need to be what I suggested, to incentivize comp play during these weeks and make it a more bearable experience. Most of the arguments I see being tossed around in defense of the Revelry lack any type of valid points about how this change to Crucible is in fact making Crucible a better experience, and how exactly people complaining have invalid points. Listen, if you like a PvP based in abilities, then PvP in the Revelry is for you. Enjoy it and have fun. In fact, if there's so much people into the Revelry, maybe Bungie should consider adding more ability-based weekly rotators, or have a quick play mayhem playlist going at all times. I'd be all for that. But when you defend this change for the Revelry so aggressively and blindly, while disregarding very valid complaints from other members of the community, you're not doing anyone a favor, and are in fact help making the game a worse overall experience. The Guardians who are complaining about the Revelry aren't saying that the tonic shouldn't have been added to the game during these 3 weeks. They just wanted to have a place to play PvP, where they could enjoy themselves, even if that single place was comp. Is that too much to ask? Well, that's all I have for you about this subject for now. Please let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and what suggestions you would have for Bungie to make this and other events better when it comes to PvP. I also encourage you to leave your feedback in the Bungie forums. That's the best place to have your ideas heard and discussed, since you can get a lot of support from other like-minded Guardians and have your ideas read by the community team, unlike, on a random dude's YouTube channel. So thanks a ton for staying with me until the very end. Hope you have a wicked day, and I'll be seeing you around.